Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Miss Jennifer Blank, and I will be your guide on Part 2 of Unit 7, and this presentation is going to focus on Manifest Destiny. So special note, this PowerPoint does not contain all the required information for this unit. Many of the key ideas will appear in class in my Nomia lessons and on the video lessons for this PowerPoint. So, Lesson 1, or Video 1, talked about Jacksonian democracy. Here we're going to talk about Manifest Destiny and Westward expansion. And our third and final PowerPoint video will discuss the reform movements of the 1800s. So, without further ado, let's move into Manifest Destiny, Part 2. So you see here, there are several different pictures. This is an introduction to Westward expansion and America's Manifest Destiny. So this painting up at the top left by John Gast, we're going to be revisiting this later on in the presentation, so I want you to take a close look at that. We're also going to be revisiting this map down below in the bottom right-hand corner, looking at the territorial acquisitions of the U.S. So I'm going to go through these slides pretty quickly because I've already covered them in a previous PowerPoint presentation. But to make a long story short, we've got a lot of different movements that are happening that drive the U.S. desire to spread its beliefs and its traditions westward and to Native Americans specifically. We have a need for a direct water route to the Pacific Ocean for trade. We have the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. Cities are becoming overcrowded, and we definitely believed it was our destiny to expand westward. Our national border security on the Atlantic and Pacific was an issue. We were concerned about border security generally. We also have this reemergence of a second party system, which increased some tensions. We have an increase in nationalism, this concern of expanding land that would be open or closed to slavery, and the possible admission of new states, which would also add fuel to that sectionalist fire. Now let me talk about Manifest Destiny from the perspective of John O'Sullivan. He was, after all, the guy who coined the term, a journalist who coined the term in 1845. And this source is very important. It symbolizes what his view of Manifest Destiny was. My students, we are going to explore this excerpt in class, and we're going to analyze this. But definitely take a look at this because this is the quote from the horse's mouth, as it were. So what is Manifest Destiny? Well, it was coined in the 1840s. It's a term that was used to justify the United States expansion westward. There were a couple of widely held underlying beliefs about this idea. Americans were the chosen people. It was a divinely inspired mission to spread democracy to the less fortunate or uncivilized. And of course, these uncivilized people were Native Americans and other non-Europeans. It was a common staple in speeches and newspaper articles at the time, and the major supporters of expansion were Democrats, but some Whigs and Republicans also later jumped on this bandwagon. So advocates of Manifest Destiny believed that it was good, that it was obvious or manifest, and that it was certain or it was our destiny to move westward. It was stated, it started as a political catchphrase during the 19th century, but over time it became a standard historical term. It was used as a synonym for expansion of the U.S., and the belief inspired and or was used to justify war. In many cases it was used to justify war, like in the case of the Mexican-American War. All right, so this is a painting by John Gast. It's called American Progress. It was in about 1872. I want you to look at this painting and tell me what you see. Kind of write it down in your notes and to make note of the colors used, the figures that are shown there. What types of technology do you see? What types of people and animals do you see? How do you feel when you see this painting? So I want you to just pause and think about that. Please feel free to pause the video if you need to. Now, that you've taken some time to pause and take a look at it, this painting is an allegorical representation of Manifest Destiny. Basically, it is symbolizing in visual form what Manifest Destiny was all about. You see this figure here. This is Columbia, and it's a personification of the United States. She is representing the United States people as we are moving westward. She's holding a telegraph wire, and she's holding a school book. So we are spreading our knowledge and our technology westward. We are civilizing the natural and unblemished terrain. And you see we have cable coach, we have horse-drawn carriages here, we have covered wagons, you see a railroad here in the back, there's another railroad there, this is representative of the canals, you see wildlife running, Native Americans running, and pioneers bravely marching forward. So, who opposed Manifest Destiny? Well, lots of people, actually. You have Christians, Whigs, Native Americans, advocates for Native Americans as well. Opponents questioned both the ideal of Manifest Destiny and also its consequences. So why did they oppose it? What was the big issue? Well, they argued that there was no way that it was God's will, or that it was even a good thing at all for this country to expand when we just had wars and we totally did bad things to native peoples. We just did horrible things. We made them less than human and treated them so miserably. God would not destine a nation to kill and subjugate people. Expansionists use this concept to justify their true treatment of those peoples and wars of expansion. And quite frankly, the need to civilize the savages who occupied the West was blatantly racist. This allowed the spread of slavery to continue, which only caused an increase in the tension between North and South, already a problem. Overexpansion was a direct threat to the country. It was spreading our national institutions too thin. We already had enough land, we should stop seeking more. And it was used to justify imperialism. The U.S. would never have tolerated being treated the way it was treating other countries. Hello, Monroe Doctrine. Not the least of which it was morally wrong and unconstitutional. So here's a map, if you will, or not a map, I'm sorry, more a line graph, a chart, showing the number of people who migrated westward and tracking the year. So greater than 250,000 people made the trek westward over this 20-year period between 1840 and 1860. Now that little sign you see right in front of the 250,000, that's greater than, for those of you who need a math refresher. Here's a close-up of this map, or of this graph, I'm sorry, so you can get a sense of when the migrations were peaking, where they were peaking, where everybody was really excited to go to, and what years that was happening. So this is important primary source data for us. So there were negative consequences following the trails west. It was really bad for American Indians. We brought diseases with us, the American settlers, and that killed a lot of people, and there was also a lot of violence that broke out. It was also disastrous to a lot of Americans because many died from disease and famine because the trail life was rough. It was not easy. It's not like some delightful ongoing bake sale. We romanticize it now, moving westward and exploring new territory. It was hard. It was violent. It was dangerous. It was not this, happy roses and sunshine all day long that people sometimes think it was. People lost a lot of stuff. They lost a lot of lives. So it was very, very tough trip. Here's a map of trails westward. As you can see from the key, there are a lot of different trails that we're looking at here. So there were a lot of different ways that folks could migrate west. So the Santa Fe Trail was really, really important. This is a map depicting that trail and where it went and where it started. So that's a nice visual for you. So what was that all about? Well, on the Santa Fe Trail, there were some problems. We had a lot of problems with Indians. So people formed organized groups with 100 wagons. They had scouts right ahead to check for danger, and they formed their wagons into squares so that they could keep their livestock in one spot and keep them from escaping. So there was a lot of teamwork, at least at first. But once Santa Fe was in sight, hostile bye-bye to the teamwork, because now the old ugly monster greed set in, and so people made a mad dash to get whatever they could by any means necessary. So that teamwork ended as soon as people got to Santa Fe. The significance. Traders at this point established the first visible American presence in New Mexico and the Mexican province of Arizona. This is going to be very important later on for the Mexican-American War. Santa Fe Trail, Mexican-American War. Established the first visible American presence. Very important. So, the Oregon Trail is also pretty important. Started in Independence, Missouri. It ended in Portland, Oregon. And what's interesting is these same routes were a lot of the same paths that Lewis and Clark followed. So, Lewis and Clark we're still reaping the benefits of their labor. Now, pioneers did face a lot of problems. This trip took months. People had to travel in covered wagons. A lot of people were walking and carrying or pushing, pushing heavy hand carts all the way through, which is pretty tough. A lot of people died from several diseases. They were often attacked by Native Americans. And with all of this craziness happening, a lot of people just got downright depressed. So it wasn't exactly good times. Now, I want you to take a look at this painting by Albert Bierstadt from 1869. It's called The Oregon Trail. And I want you to kind of record the similar observations that you did with the previous piece, American Progress, by John Gass. Tell me how this makes you feel. What do you see in this painting? What items do you notice? What items are missing? So I want you to kind of make some notes about this and tell me what you're thinking when you see it. All right, so the Doomed Donner Party. This is an infamous story of history about a group of folks who actually had to resort to cannibalism because they got snowbound in the Sierra Nevada And they were stuck there. They couldn't go anywhere for quite some time. They ran out of food, so they just ate each other. So that's not really that hot, but you got to do what you got to do to survive. Of the 83 members, only 45 survived to even make it to California. So here's some other depictions of the doomed Donner Party. You see the party route down here at the bottom left. The top left, you see a painting depicting the party, and then there's a historical book about the doomed Donner Party, those poor folks. So the Mormon migration. We've heard a lot about discussion of Mormons and what they're all about, so let's dispel the rumors and talk about some legit history here. So the Mormons were a religious community based on Christianity, and they were founded in western New York by Joseph Smith in 1827. With his 5 associates, he established the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But once people heard about their practice of polygamy, that's the Mormon practice of having more than one wife, then they were forced to move west because angry neighbors were protesting. Before they could actually get there, Smith himself was arrested and charged with treason because he broke the printing press of his neighbors who printed stories about what he did. An anti-Mormon mob killed Smith and his brother, and this is pictured at the right. This slide comes from Susan Poher. It's a PowerPoint from PowerPoint Palooza. Please feel free to look her up. She's a fantastic resource. So, in continuing with the Mormon migration, Smith's successor, Brigham Young, led the Mormons west beyond the borders of the U.S. They settled in Utah, in Great Salt Lake, so Salt Lake City, Utah. Still to this day, you have a very large Mormon population. Families were awarded plots of land according to size of the family, and the communal ownership of 2 critical resources was very, very important: water and timberland. Okay? Now, as we're thinking about this, I want you to consider the following discussion questions below. What role did religion play in westward expansion, if any? And how did Christian missionaries and the Mormons spread American ideals? Were they effective? Why or why not? So I want you to kind of think about this as we move forward in discussing this topic. So then we have this random kind of war, and you see the war is in quotes. This is the Aroostook War of 1839. It's the only war ever declared by a state. It was bloodless. It was between the Canadian region of New Brunswick and the state of Maine. Key cause was that Maine officials kicked out Canadian lumberjacks. Congress called up 50,000 men and voted up to $10 million to pay for the war, but General Scott arranged a truce, and a border commission was convened to resolve this issue. Which brings us in to the Oregon dispute, which would also be an issue with both Great Britain and with Canada. Okay, so by the mid-1840s, Oregon fever was spurred on by the promise of free land. In 1844, James Polk, who we met in the first presentation, his presidential platform called for the annexation of the entire territory. Again, with the Manifest Destiny, expand the United States borders. Newspapers adopted the slogan 54-40 or fight, which represents this boundary line over here. Okay, that was the longitude, that was the map line of where that territory was. So that's why we have the 54-40 or fight. So the Webster-Ashburton Treaty of 1842 actually settled all of these issues. It settled finished up the Aroostook War, and it settled this problem with British Columbia, as it were. We now had some control over the Oregon Territory. It was Britain and the U.S. jointly occupied it. But so at least there were some issues that were resolved with the Webster-Ashburton Treaty. So here's the Maine boundary settlement here, and you can see the Webster-Ashburton treaty line that set that up, so that solved that issue. Things did look up for the Western expansionists. In the mid-1840s, fur trade was in decline. Britain lost interest in occupying Oregon because they had bigger fish to fry. And Polk's advisors deemed the land north of the 49th latitude unsuitable for agriculture and abandoned acquiring any land beyond the 49th parallel. So the situation kind of wrapped itself up. In 1846, the U.S. and Britain peaceably agreed to extend the mainland boundary with Canada along the 49th parallel, westward from the Rocky Mountains to Puget Sound. And this treaty, or this issue right here, establishes the current U.S. border with Canada. So, key ideas we talked about from Part 2, talked about the Webster-Ashburton Treaty, Manifest Destiny, and the Oregon dispute. I hope you learned what you need to. I hope it was useful for you, and I will see you next time.